And thank you very much. Let's give an applause to our presenters. Let me confirm to you, Madam Anne Gatia and Elizabeth Upadte, you have exceeded our expectation. That is, maybe we could give you tick 4, according to the assessment, which Upadte has just given us. And directors, the ones who are online, and the ones who are the 2 or 3 who are here, and that was a very educative topic, and they have done it well. Personally, I've been able to engage in other forums with Elizabeth Upadte, and she's very passionate in education, together with Ngatia, especially in training. And I can confirm that there was no better choice for the NEC to have given us than those 2 ladies. Thank you very much. Maybe the next time we shall call upon you. I'm sure you'll be ready to talk to us. Directors, the ones who are online, we are still moving on well. We really want to apologize because of the time and maybe the few technical hitches which we've been having. And it is our wish that we will not take more time than expected. And then we also wish that we are not going to have that kind of technical problem. Kindly bear with us, and I'm sure we are benefiting and we are moving on well. At this time, we want to invite KICD to give us an insight of effective interpretation of the curriculum design. And this one is a very good topic because we interpret design in different ways. And we actually, the way we interpret it is the way we implement it. So at this time, we are going to get it from the source. In fact, Madam Mudeu and your secretariat, we are happy that you brought us here where the curriculum is being done. And we are going to then, I don't know whether I'm lost. Then we are also going to have a talk on access, affordability, and the supply of curriculum support materials. This one will be very keen, especially what we are hearing in the social media, that the parents are being overburdened. And it will be a very good representation for us so that we can be able to tell whether we are overdoing it or perhaps somebody is not getting it right. To kill it or to tell us, we have Grace Gogi, who is Deputy Director, Special Program. And this is actually our area. Special Program includes even talking to parents, involvement, and many other areas. She is a lady who has been curriculum development KICD for many years, and is a lady who I've known here through other interactions in education matters. And also we have Winrose Rono, who is the Acting Deputy Director, Primary Education. So we do not have any other better choice than Winrose Rono, who is the Deputy Director in Primary Education. At this juncture, I want to invite Winrose Rono to come and give us insights. Karibu sana. Let's give her applause. Even if you're online, we appreciate this lady. Karibu. Shortly, should be on air.
Thank you very much for a warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As you've been told, my name is Winrose Rono. I work here at KICD, and I'll be taking us through effective curriculum implementation. And we will be are looking at the components of a curriculum design, and specifically we will be looking at the interrelationships between the different components of a curriculum design. The main reason for us today to understand the components of a curriculum design is for purposes of us to be able to guide, support, and even mentor our teachers as they implement the curriculum. We know there is a paradigm shift, there has been a change, and as we all know, change is always resisted. So unless we get things clear, we may not be able to embrace the change. So I want to start my presentation by what is a curriculum, what is a curriculum design, and what's the difference between a curriculum design and a syllabus. I know there's been a lot of debate as to why we are moving away from using a syllabus to curriculum design. Let's move on to the next slide, please. A curriculum design basically means all the planned activities, programs that are meant to facilitate achievements of learning outcomes. And when you talk about learning outcomes target both the formal, the non-formal, and the informal dimension of learning. So all that we plan and implement in our learning institution comprise curriculum. So what do we mean by a curriculum design? A curriculum design is a document. It's a curriculum document that actually guides the teacher to effectively implement the curriculum. So we would say a curriculum design is a systematic organization of the curriculum components in substantive entities. It's actually a detailed outline of what is to be covered in a specific learning area within a given period. So what then is a syllabus? If you look at a syllabus, it's basically an extract from a curriculum design. So a curriculum design is more detailed. It gives more information. It gives clear guidance to the teacher on what is to be done. But a syllabus is a summarized or has summarized information on what is expected to be done in schools. So, move on to the next slide. There are several components within a curriculum design. And the first one is the national goals of education. We have the level learning outcomes. We have the essence statement. We have the general learning outcomes. We also have the strands and the substrands. We have the learning outcomes, the specific learning outcomes. We have suggested learning experiences. We also have the key inquiry question or key inquiry questions. We also have core competencies to be developed. We move on to pertinent and contemporary issues to be developed. We also have values linked to other learning areas, community service learning, non-formal activities to support learning. We have suggested learning resources. We also have suggested assessment methods and assessment rubric. We also have other components that are appended in the curriculum design. And as you can see in the template that is projected on the screen, that is how the components are arranged in the curriculum design. If you look at that template, let's stay on the slide a little bit more. You can see that most of the components are suggested. I want us to mark that. And this was indicated clearly to us by the first speaker, and I'm happy that he did that. So when you look at all those components, as a teacher's plan their curriculum delivery, they must take into consideration all those components. And as a plan for those components, what should come out clearly is how are they related. Let's move on. So let's look at each component one by one, and we start with the national goals of education, because that is the basis of actually a curriculum in our country. And we all know that national goals of education are the aspirations that we have as a country that we would like to achieve through education. They actually guide us on what we think is valuable as far as matters education in this country are concerned. So from the national goals of education, we normally develop the level learning outcomes. So what are these level learning outcomes? The level learning outcomes are the outcomes that we expect to achieve at the end of every level of education. We all know there are several levels in our education structure. For instance, in the case of competency-based curriculum, we have early years education as a level. And within that, there are certain expectations that we'd like to see in our learners once they go through that level. So in that regard, there are level learning outcomes that have been developed, and they are derived from the national goals of education. Next is an essence statement. What is an essence statement? An essence statement basically gives us a summary of what a learning area entails. It also gives us the rationale of inclusion of a given area in the curriculum. For instance, if we are looking at the essence statement of agriculture, that is where we will be able to know what was the rationale, what is the importance of having agriculture in the curriculum. Next, we have the general learning outcomes. These are outcomes that are specific to the different learning areas offered in the curriculum. So that we are saying, if a learner has to go through agriculture, has to learn agriculture, what are the expectations that we expect to see in terms of behavior, in terms of the skills they've acquired, in terms of the values they've acquired, and even in terms of the attitudes they may have developed. From there, we move on to the strand and the substrand. And I know quite a number of us have been asking why the change from a topic to a strand. And we are saying a strand basically is a consistent idea. It's a concept that runs through a learning area, and it may also cut across through the different levels of education. I remember in the first presentation, we were told about plans. And you can teach about plans, or we can learn about plans right from early years education to tertiary level. So that forms a strand. And within a strand, we have the substrand. And the substrand basically represents the smaller components within a given strand. So that if you're looking at a strand on plants, for instance, within that strand, you may have flowering and non-flowering plants as a substrand. So once we're done with the substrand, we have the specific learning outcomes. And this is where now we achieve at classroom level. So what do we mean by specific learning outcomes? These are expected results, or the expected end result, once a learner has gone through a given learning experience. And we normally see this through learners exhibiting new knowledge, new skills, new values, or new attitudes acquired. So these ones are normally demonstrated through behavior change. And in competency-based curriculum, the development of learning outcomes are such that they meet a certain criteria. For instance, a specific learning outcome must have an action verb. They must have an action verb. It must also indicate the object of the verb. And finally, it must always have a context. And this is a paradigm shift from what we used to have in objective-based curriculum. So how, as managers, how would we be able to tell that the lesson outcomes that are developed by our teachers actually meet the set criteria of a learning outcome? And I just want to give a few examples here where we see how an action verb is indicated in a learning outcome. When you look at those learning outcomes, what is colored in red are the action verbs. Next, we see how the object of the verb is indicated in a learning outcome. So, an object basically seeks to answer the question, what? And here, the action verb is to identify. So, identify what? And the what here are wastes in the environment, types of wastes. And the context would be, or seeking to answer the question, why? Why are we identifying wastes? For what purpose? Where are we identifying these wastes? And how are we identifying these wastes? And that forms the context of the learning outcome. Next. The other component, which is very, very critical, are the learning experiences. What are the learning experiences? Learning experiences are basically activities or tasks that are designed to facilitate achievement of learning outcomes. And usually, when learning experiences are developed, they must also target both the cognitive, the psychomotor, and the affective domains of learning. So we would say learning experiences are activities or interactions that are provided to enable learning to take place. And if you can remember in the template, the learning experiences are suggested. They are suggested. What do we mean by suggested? They are suggested in the sense that what is provided in the curriculum design are not cast on stone. So the teachers are at liberty to actually modify, to actually change, to actually select the few that they think actually meet or are relevant to their context or appropriate to the kind of learners that they are dealing with. So what factors must be considered when selecting learning experiences? One, they must always be guided by the learning outcomes. So the learning outcomes will always dictate the kind of experiences that a teacher will organize for the learners. The time required. What time do you have at your disposal for any task, any activity that you plan for the learners? You must also consider the developmental age of the learners. They must be appropriate. They must be tasks that can actually be handled by the learners. What are the learning resources at your disposal? So that you don't expect teachers to assign learners activities that will require resources that are too expensive, or organize learning activities that are beyond reach of the parents. We also look at the safety of the learners as we organize any activity. Safety of the learners is paramount. So what informs learning experiences? CBC, as we all know, endeavors to give learners the opportunity to actually take responsibility of their own learning. And this is based or is informed by certain factors. One is a multiple intelligence theory. This is a theory that was propounded by one Howard Gardner, who says all human beings are endowed with multiple intelligences. It's only that some intelligences are more enhanced than others. So what does that mean then to us in terms of learning experiences? It means we must provide varied experiences to cater for all these multiple intelligences. Because if we stick to specific learning experiences, it means we are excluding some learners. So what then are we expected to do? It's answered by the question on differentiated learning. This tells us, as human beings, we are different. And therefore, we also learn differently. So if we learn differently, it means we cannot have a straitjacket as a learning experience for all the learners in a given context. We must always vary them so as to accommodate everyone. We all know that people have different learning styles, and that also brings us to the different learning activities. So some activities can be outdoor, some activities can be carried out within the classroom setup, others can even be carried out as non-formal activities. Next. Next slide, please. So as managers, what is our role as far as learning experiences are concerned? We must always allow, we must facilitate our teachers to plan and execute the different learning experiences. Next slide, please. So the next component is a key inquiry question. And we ask ourselves, what is the purpose? What role does a key inquiry question play as far as curriculum delivery is concerned? A key inquiry question is a question that guides or that is used to guide learning. And it's based on inquiry-based learning. Remember, competency-based curriculum is premised on the fact that learners make meaning from experiences that they get outside classroom or through interaction with peers. So learners must be given opportunities to actually explore, to actually find out for themselves, and also discover or make discoveries as far as the different learning experiences are concerned. So the next are the pertinent and contemporary issues. These are pertinent issues that affect society in one way or another, and they have to be addressed through the curriculum. We can move on. Next slide. So we've talked about the key inquiry questions. We've also talked about the pertinent and contemporary issues, which is a component in the competency-based curriculum. Kindly let's go back to core competences. Core competences. Yes. Core competences to be developed is another component in our curriculum design. But we must ask ourselves, what is a competency? A competency is actually the ability to apply appropriate knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values to successfully perform a function within a given time. And the basic education curriculum framework has made deliberate effort to identify 7 core competencies that must be emphasized in the curriculum. And they are listed, as you can see on the screen. So, how are they related to the other components that we have just talked about? Core competencies can be achieved through the experiences that we organize for our learners. If we are talking about learning to learn, for instance, what kind of experiences would you organize to ensure that learners actually acquire or develop that competency of learning to learn? Next slide. We've talked about the core competences. Another component is the values, and these are basically the set standards to regulate behavior in society. And again, our framework has identified 8 core values that must be addressed through the curriculum. So as we supervise implementation of the curriculum, we must ensure that these issues are adequately captured in the planning as well as execution. Next slide. We also have linked to other learning areas, and this is based on the understanding that we acquire skills through a variety of avenues, and some skills, knowledge can be transferred from one learning area to another. For instance, you could be teaching about conservation of the environment in the learning area of social studies. The same concept can be enhanced in religious education, where you could be teaching about God's creation. So there's always link. There's always linkage between concepts across the different learning areas. Next. Community service learning. We are all cognizant of the fact that over time, there was a disconnect between what happens in school or learning institutions and the expectations of society, where you'd find that you'd get a learner scoring A in physics, but such a learner does not have the ability to fix a bulb. So the reason why CSL was introduced in the curriculum was to ensure that learners actually apply what they've learned in school in solving community problems. So in that way, learning becomes meaningful, learning becomes purposeful. But we are also saying they must be linked to the expectations of the curriculum design. They must be guided by the learning outcomes, so that we don't get a situation where teachers just organize community service learning activities just for the sake of getting out of school. There must always be deliberate effort to ensure those community service learning activities are actually supporting what has been learned in schools. So the next component is the non-formal activities. So these are organized and structured activities that take place in or outside school, and they are all meant to support acquisition of competencies. This could be in form of clubs, music, festivals, clubs, and societies, among others. So as teachers organize for these activities, we must always ensure they are aligned to the learning outcomes, so that we don't just have music festivals for the sake of having them, but they must enhance understanding of certain concepts. Finally, we have assessment methods. I'm glad that my colleagues from Exam Council have clearly articulated this, but in the curriculum designs, we are also making suggestions that after delivering this concept, how best can you be able to determine whether the concept was understood or not? And we have made suggestions, and we are saying whatever is suggested is not cast on stone. Teachers are free to use whichever appropriate assessment methods that they may think are relevant to their contexts. And finally, we have an assessment rubric. This is a scoring guide that is also provided in the curriculum design. And just like the other components, we are also saying teachers are free to customize as long as they meet the expectations of the curriculum design. Next. We also have suggested learning resources which are appended in the curriculum designs, and we are also saying they are just suggested. We are not saying those are the ones that must be used across all the schools in the country. They are just suggested. They can be used. The teacher is at liberty to select or improvise or get others that would suit their circumstances. And finally, I want to show the relationship between what happens at the classroom level all the way to achievement of national goals of education. It's clearly shown in that diagram. I wouldn't like to belabor on that, but you can see that at the classroom level, we are also saying the teachers are free to break down the learning outcomes provided and develop their own lesson outcomes, as long as they don't deviate from what has been provided, as long as they don't alter the expectations. They are allowed to break down the learning outcomes to lesson learning outcomes. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for listening to me, and be blessed.
Mine is simply to continue from where my colleague Windrose Rono has left, and I will move pretty fast because much of the presentation has been done by Windrose Rono. Okay, so you had requested KICD to talk about access, affordability, and supply of learning resources, and that is what we'll be talking about. And I will take two dimensions in this, in this presentation. We'll talk about materials that are developed by the publishing houses. But we'll also be talking about materials that are normally improvised by the teachers and the learners with support from their parents. So I'll be looking at those two dimensions. Let's go on. So learning resources are a very important segment in the learning process. Sorry about that. So we are saying that without learning resources, then we cannot talk about effective teaching and learning experiences. They play a very, very important role in the learning process. And actually theorists, education theorists have said that there are three critical elements in a learning endeavor: the teacher, the learner, and the learning resources. They say that interaction between the teachers, parents, and instructional materials tend to influence the cognitive and affective development of the learner. So if one of them is missing, then we are simply saying that learning may not take place effectively. That is why your organization clearly stated that you have to talk about learning resources. And you can see what is happening there. You can see their learners. The teacher is also there providing instruction and facilitation. And you can also see that learners themselves are actually collaborating in the learning experience. Next. Next, please. So learning resources are devices and procedures that help to make teaching and learning more interesting, more stimulating, more reinforcing, and more effective. I don't want to belabor that point because I know that we all appreciate what learning resources do in the learning process. And in the interest of time, I want to move a little faster, move to the next one. I was told to take the shortest time possible. Just go on. That is all those slides you can see that are flipping through are talking about the purpose of having learning resources in the learning process. I could say that we need to consider a number of factors as we identify learning resources. They must be relevant. And the question we need to keep asking the heads of institutions and the teachers, are they identifying resources that are relevant? They must answer that question. One of the serious contentious issues that you're having with parents, between parents and schools, is that parents feel they are asked to buy materials or provide learning materials that are not relevant to the level. So that is a very serious issue, and you need to keep looking at that. Attractiveness, children like attractive things, just like adults. It's even more appealing to them. I mean, this is a very critical point for children, much more than the learners, and all those other factors are very, very critical. They must be interesting. If you're talking about a PP1 child, they tend to learn more when you provide materials that are illustrative, materials that have pictures as opposed to content. The issue, of course, is critical. I'll be talking about that when we'll be talking about affordability. Issues of availability: are the materials you're asking parents to provide available or not? Are they available or not? Because if they are not, then that also brings about frustration. Let's go on, please. You talked about three things: access, affordability, and supply. And when you talk about access, you're simply saying access of resources is an end of a process which begins from, first and foremost, having interacted with the designs themselves. Because designs are the ones that provide guidance on what kind of materials a teacher will need in a particular learning area or a subject. So you cannot talk about learning resources without thinking about the designs in various learning areas. Then from there, we need to actually understand, we have to conceptualize what is in those designs. Because if we don't, we are going to ask for outrageous resources from the parents and the learners. So it's not just about having the designs and teachers putting them under lock and key. Many teachers tend to focus more on curriculum support materials as opposed to the designs for guidance. But you're saying that, I'm struggling with this mask. Allow me to remove it. Yeah, thank you. So teachers tend to focus more on the learning resources for your guidance as opposed to the designs. But you're saying that the designs are the ones that should determine what kind of learning resources would be required in the learning experience. Internet is really failing us today, but I can continue. So once the teacher has conceptualized the requirements, the required learning resources, they will now need to identify, maybe I can use my I can use my laptop in the meantime. So we've talked about designs. We've talked about designs and the need for us to keep making reference to the designs. We've talked about, yeah, that's okay. We've talked about guidance from the designs, and now we are simply saying that from there we know that Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development depends to a large extent on the publishing houses. Those are the ones that develop materials. And once materials have been developed by the publishing houses, then they are brought to the Ministry of Education to be vetted. There is evaluation and the vetting process that goes through the materials that have been presented to us. Of course, we also develop materials as publishers of the last resort, especially in special needs education. And so after evaluation has taken place, then publishers are actually informed. Those whose materials have been approved, they are informed, and there is mass production. And what normally happens is that there's a book we call Orange Book. And I'm so glad one of the private schools called me about 4 months ago. I was shocked to hear, because they were telling me, we understand there is an Orange Book. And I said, but this school has been here for so long. So whom do you depend on for guidance on the kind of books you should use? But I did not express my wonder or the way I was puzzled, and I just simply said, it is in the website, but I will also send you a copy, the current copy of the Orange Book. And so materials are developed, they are brought for vetting. KICD has been appointed by the Ministry of Education to support in the evaluation process, and once evaluation has taken place, the approval process commences, and finally, the books that have met the threshold are actually put in the Orange Book. And I'm hoping that every school should endeavor every year to have the Orange Book that will provide guidance on the list of books that have been recommended for use in learning institutions. After that has happened, of course, the books are taken to there of course, what are they called? The bookshops will buy those books and store them. Then teachers and the head teachers from private schools can actually access those books from there. I'm talking about this because I also know many times people come to KICD to ask for books, but normally would recommend them to go to some of the major bookshops to get the books, as long as they are carrying with them the approved list of the books that are stipulated in the Orange Book. If parents are supposed to buy books, parents in private schools are supposed to buy books, it is very, very important that proper instruction is given on which book. And I want to say at this point that the approved books, for every learning area or a subject, at least there would be 3 approved books. But we want to say our learners do not have the cognitive capacity to manage more than 1 book. I will repeat that again. Our learners do not have the capacity to do what? They don't have the cognitive capacity to manage more than 1 book in every learning area. So if you want to buy or ask parents to buy books, you should have that in mind. For the teacher, it's okay. The teacher can have more than 1 what? 1 course book for cross-referencing and for note-making. But for the learners, there's no point of asking a learner to have 3 books to take care of what? Of social studies. They just need 1. And that makes learning less costly. I think I've talked about the access, and I have started from the designs all the way to development of the materials, the evaluation, the approval, and now you've gotten the orange book, and you have now given the parents instructions on which books to buy, and you have said there's no point of asking so much from the parents. On affordability, I want to say that the government of Kenya is keen on ensuring the approved books are relevant, quality, and affordable. That is why we will have a set of professionals who are supposed to go through training, and then they embark on the evaluation process. We want to assure you about that, because we also know that we have had complaints of people saying KICD hawajui venye wanafanya as far as evaluation of books is concerned. In fact, some of the evaluators come from private institutions, and they are quite conversant with the subject matter. So as a government of Kenya, we are keen to make sure that the evaluation process is effective and quality has been observed. Then the course is one of the specifications that determines the approval of the books, and other related learning materials. So when we say that books are expensive, we have taken into consideration the quality of the material, but we've also been very, very keen to say, if you price your book so highly, then it will not be approved. Because the issue of cost is one of the specifications that is looked into during the approval process. And then the price is listed on the orange book. And actually, for consumer protection, then there is exclusive of 16% VAT. So that is also a very special consideration, so that now the cost of the books is not really so much. Again, it has disappeared. I'm so sorry about this. Then I wanted to say that the government is not able to get, low prices because of bulk buying. The reason as to why the government is even able to buy books for all public institutions is because they also buy a lot of books from the publishing houses. And we just want to share a tip to say that perhaps you should consider, as members of private schools association, to take the initiative of bringing yourselves together so that there can be synergy, and when you actually come together, then you can strengthen your bargaining power. When you buy books in bulk, it gets a little cheaper on your end. I don't know whether that has happened, but if that doesn't happen, just create synergy, come together as Kpsa, and you agree on which books to buy, and then you buy in bulk. That way, then the books will be less costly. Then, on the other hand, parents and teachers should establish connections so that the issue of material affordability is addressed. There is normally a lot of tug of war between schools and the parents. Parents will go and buy books, and they come and they're told, no, we did not ask for these books, and they've probably spent 8,000 shillings just because they were not given proper instructions by a specific teacher. So it's our obligation to make sure that there's proper connection between the school and the parents. We also need to challenge our teachers to actually challenge the parents to also try as much as possible to access locally available materials, and that, of course, will enhance affordability. There are so many resources in the locality that parents can actually identify and give to their children, and that will enhance their quality learning. They don't have to keep going to the bookshops to buy all the items that are required. Hello? Iko sawa? Okay. On issues of supply, let me just say this in a soft way, but to say that the government does not supply books to private schools, essentially because much as private schools are providing quality education to the children, they are business entities. So again, it's a question that a number of schools they'll keep saying, how come the government cannot give us books or give us money as well to buy books for their children? Private schools are considered as business entities, and that is why the government of Kenya does not supply books to private schools. Again, something to do with supply is that approved books are listed. I think I talked about that. It is the responsibility of the school to really work with the parents very, very closely to ensure that the books are in school on time. So that you're not telling the parent today that you want the children to come with the following books tomorrow. Again, there has to be a very good established way of communicating to the teachers, so that the parents, so that the parents don't feel frustrated and the learners are also not feeling frustrated. I think it is important for the schools to identify the orange book in good time and communicate the same to the teachers, and then the teachers communicate to the parents. Let me now talk about locally available resources. Parents are very, very important in the children's holistic growth and development at all levels of learning. I have said that parents should support private institutions to provide locally and easily available resources for use during the learning process at home or school. I do not have the time to actually talk about this. But if you're talking about coming up with, you say, piggy banks or bean bags or beads, these are things that can actually be prepared at home by the learner with the support, with the moral, I'm talking about moral support from the parent. And we have the obligation, first and foremost, to empower the parents, to make them feel confident that they can support their children, to also identify resources they can use, and they can even bring them to school. It is important for the teachers to make sure that learners understand, and the parents as well understand the assigned homework. Because sometimes we tend to use so many resources just because people did not take time to provide proper guidance to the parent and the learner on the assigned homework. It is your obligation as well as make sure that you have talked to the parent on the importance of creating a conducive environment that would make the learners actually feel comfortable to do their homework. It is the obligation of the parent to make sure there is time, space, and a quiet environment for the learners to embark on their homework free from distraction. I think I don't want to go into these details because this now falls under the purview of parental empowerment and engagement, and somebody talked about that. And because we were so delighted by the first presenter who talked about parental empowerment and engagement, we have decided as KICD, for those who are in this hall today, we can give you copies of the parental empowerment and engagement guidelines. You can clap for us if you're grateful. Asante sana. I think I don't wish to go into the others because I know there is one more presenter that is waiting to talk. I want to conclude my presentation. My laptop is really misbehaving. I want to conclude by giving more emphasis on what I had said earlier on. Number one, CBC does not advocate for the demands by some schools that parents purchase unnecessary learning materials. The curriculum designs outline suggested learning experiences and materials to guide teachers in varied learning contexts. And because we are now empowering the parents and we want them to be engaged in the learning process of their children, if a parent comes to school to challenge the teacher, we expect the principals of those learning institutions to create a conducive environment for the parent and the teacher to talk about resources that are required. Because CBC does not advocate for what? Too much demand as far as resources are concerned. In fact, we are keen on innovation and creativity in identifying and using locally available resources that are at no cost or very little costs. Number two, we want to say that as much as the curriculum designs propose learning experiences and resources, teachers ought to consider the uniqueness of each learning institution and vary or adjust the learning to reflect the needs of a given school or the set of learners. So if you realize that among the suggested resources we have given in the designs are not easily available, the teacher can actually use their own discretion to suggest to the parent what else they can provide. However, let us remember that the designs have been developed in a way that will take care of both the parents who belong to the high socioeconomic status and the parents also who belong to the low socioeconomic status. My number 3 point is that parents should interrogate any demands to purchase unnecessary learning materials. That is what we are saying. That's parental empowerment. Parents should actually interrogate, and schools should not feel bad about that. If a parent is not satisfied about a resource they have been asked to buy, they can walk into the school and say, last night you sent my child, and you told them to come to school with a pair of gumboots, and what else? An overcoat and a djembe. That is not practical, because you're asking for these things today in the evening, and my child was supposed to bring them today. And that is why I have come to school to say that that is not realistic. So please, when you see parents becoming a little more firm, just remember they are being empowered. And there ought to be very good connection between the parents and the schools. The Institute encourages learners and teachers to be creative, improvise materials, and use readily available resources from the immediate environment. So I want to thank you for listening to us. Sorry, my presentation was a bit disrupted because of connectivity, and I tend to be very, very structural in my presentation. So if I have taken some extra minutes, you can blame me, but you can also blame the connectivity. Asanteni sana, we want to say that learning resources can be accessible, they can be affordable, and you can also have enough supply, and especially when you want to use resources that are also locally available. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, Grace Gogi. Together with your co-presenter, you've really done a very good job. Rose Rono, I can confirm you are a teacher, but all of you. Let's give them an applause, of course. Thank you very much. So far, we are doing very well, and I'm happy Daktari set a very good pace. We are very appreciative, and we really want to appreciate even giving us the book. We are going to make use of it. Directors, the ones who are online, the booklet has already been shared as a soft copy, and you'll get it in your group WhatsApps in your counties. It's already shared with the National Executive and the other members. It is already online. You'll get it, and once you get it, you just need to print. I also want to confirm that the presentations which are done here, they are going to be shared by the Secretariat, which is headed by Peter Doro, to the directors, whether they are here or online. At this juncture, and please, Grace Goge, don't feel apologetic. The content and the information was very important, especially to us as we look forward to junior secondary. At this time, I want to invite Ruth Mugambi, who is here to talk on behalf of the Ministry of Education. She is supposed to tell us about the progress made in the implementation of the new curriculum, government support for CBC, and the role of private schools. As she comes, Ruth Mugambi is an officer who is very well known to most of us, because before she went to the ministry, allow me to say this, she was here, I think, 2 or 3 months ago, a very senior officer here, and now she went to Jogo House to support the curriculum. I think there is no other person who could have been come here other than you, because you know about the curriculum development, teacher training, and now you are supporting the curriculum. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you. You are using this or the, okay.
Good afternoon. So I thank you so much for the introduction. I'll just go through the presentation. But first, I would like to say that on the 9th of February this year, the President announced a new State Department. Okay, let me be like Grace, I remove my mask. Yeah, the President announced the new State Department for Implementation of Curriculum Reforms. So we call ourselves ICR, Implementation of Curriculum Reforms. The State Department, the President felt there was a recommendation by the task force in which Mr. Doro was a member of. There was a recommendation that a unit be set apart for specifically overseeing the implementation of this new CBC curriculum. But the President, in his wisdom, decided that it needed the status of a State Department. And the chair of the task force, we call it the Fatuma Chege Task Force, or it's actually about access, relevance, transition, quality, and equity in curriculum implementation. The task force was chaired by Professor Fatuma Chege, and in his wisdom, he also made her the permanent secretary in charge of this new State Department in which I represent, as rightfully said, about 3 months ago. So really, the function of the State Department is really to coordinate the curriculum reforms, the CBC reforms, because nationally, there are very many players that have been mandated to actually implement. So they needed a structure in which all the players, that is those in charge of development, assessment, implementation, quality assurance, they needed a structure in which those three, or even those like Kemi who are in charge of teacher managers, a structure is needed for that coordination to ensure effective implementation of the reforms. Also, the department is going to monitor curriculum implementation so as to find out whether there are any issues and to have mitigation, to mitigate the issues that may arise. We are also talking about monitoring and evaluation, and of course, really it is about overseeing curriculum implementation in CBC. So some of us who supported the task force when I was here at KICD, and those who are with us, actually members who were in the task force as it is. So it's important to give just a brief background on who we are and what we are doing so that one can see there's actually no duplication in terms of the activities that are taking place. So I just want to give also a very fast background. The first few slides, I don't know that the second slide can go on board. It's just to see the rollout. And I think one of the first things we must agree is that our current first cohort of CBC are currently in grade 5. And what we know is that in 2023 becomes a very important time in CBC implementation because the first cohort will be in junior secondary at the same time with the second last cohort that shall enter Form 1. We also know that in 2026 becomes another important year, and that is the year when the first cohort shall join junior secondary school. So these are some of the things that we are implementing. The other thing that the task force report showed is that there are 4 important transitional, the next slide, the transitional points that even you as private schools must recognize. The first one is between PP1 and grade 1. And that was one thing that the CBC tried to address in terms of that smooth transition. The other transition is between grade 6 and grade 7 when the learners transit from primary to junior secondary. The third one is the one from junior secondary to senior secondary. So, and the fourth one, this is what really CBC is trying to address is once they graduate from secondary school, what kind of learner do we want to produce? And that is why we have a vision statement of engaged, empowered, and ethical citizens. So that is what we are graduating at that point of time. So it also becomes a very important transition point for us who have been heavily involved in KICD. If I keep saying from KICD, just forgive me, 3 months is a short time after 20 years of being at KICD. So maybe I just want to give short briefs about what we expect from the task force report, because the president actually said we are implementing the task force report, and that is what we are doing. So let's look at quickly about the transition to junior secondary school. And one of the things we must recognize is that junior secondary school has a very young population of 12 to 14 years. And this is a time and stage in their lifetime when children are experiencing various cognitive, psychological, psychosocial. I think Grace would have been a better person to talk about these changes that are happening from the age of 12. The government policy is 100% transition, meaning that we do not want to leave any child behind in grade 6. All the children, whether they are 844 or whether they are CBC, must transit to secondary school. And then, of course, there is the issue between 2023 and 2024. The teachers you are having in your schools will actually be operating on 2 curriculums, both 844 and CBC. So you can imagine if you're teaching maths in Form 1 and maths in grade 7, the strategy of implementing that is different. So the same teachers shall be expected to actually facilitate learning using 2 different curriculums. So that would be a challenge to your teachers as we go forward. And of course, we know we are using the facing in and facing out approach. This was also used in 2002 during the last review, and it seemed to work better than what happened in 1985 when the implementation was across the board. So that is a strategy we are seeing. Then, of course, the other one, which is true, is that the CBC in secondary school is 6 years. This means that there will be new demands in infrastructure and new demands in the teacher and the kind of teacher and the quality of teacher that we are talking about. And then, of course, I've talked about that. The next slide where are we? The next slide really shows the graph. This graph is just to show you how sensitive that cohort of 12, 13, and 14 years. In the last, I think this is over many years, the highest dropout rates of Kenyan children are those of 12 years old. They've been dropping out of school. Why? Probably, we may not know. They're experiencing physical and mental changes, psychological changes. Maybe they are still feeling they're in primary school, yet they have become adolescents. So what this is trying to tell us is as we embrace these children, as they come into junior secondary school, we must be sensitive to their needs, apart from their cognitive needs, but also their social needs and their psychological needs so that they do not drop out of school. Now, what do we expect? What are the expectations of a curriculum in junior secondary? One is that junior secondary offers a broad curriculum. If you look, most of you have now interacted with the primary school curriculum, you will notice that in early years, there are 5 subjects, they go on to 9, but in junior secondary, the subjects continuously increase. And that is what we are calling a broad curriculum, because we are exposing learners to what is there in the world. Different subjects, different opportunities for them to identify themselves, to know who they are, what can I do, what are my abilities, what are my strengths, so that when they go to junior secondary, they are able to choose subjects based on their career choices. But what does this mean, therefore? It means that in junior secondary school, we need to have a very rigorous career guidance program. So that was the recommendation of the task force. You must have a career guidance program so that learners make informed choices as they go to senior secondary school. The other thing is that teachers, therefore, have to be retooled, not going back to be trained. It's not about that the teacher needs to go back to school. Somebody has given an example. Like doctors, did they go back to be trained because of COVID-19? what happened to them? They were just retooled to handle, isn't it? And it's the same thing. Anything that is emerging, you just get retooled in order to be able to embrace the same. And that is what we're talking about CBC. It is not about going back to school and starting all over again. So we need to just, KICD needs to just probably train teachers on the new depth, the new scope of the new curriculum, and also the universities are on board and the teacher training colleges to embrace the new learning areas that are coming in. And TSC is obviously rationalizing the teachers to ensure that they are adequate. So what are the recommendations of the task force? One is that junior secondary is part of secondary education. It is not part of primary education. It is part of secondary education. And therefore,